Okay, this is class 6 of music business and law. The date today is April 27th, 2020. So we have one more class after this, and so we're in the process of tying everything together here. So I want to start with just a recap of the stuff that you have coming up. Everything that you should have everything handed in that's due up to this point. Which includes your rough draft. If you don't have that in, make sure that you get it in the next 24 hours. I really need to have those early so that I can start the process of grading it, and it is counted against your final grade. So make sure that you get everything in that you need to get in. The research paper, again, is 1,250 words, at least 3 sources, 10-minute presentation. If you haven't handed in your rough draft, it's now overdue. Presentations. Let's see, final draft and presentations. That'll be, we'll do that now as part of the class for next week. I'll be broadcasting the class live on, let's do a Zoom meeting. And I'll set that up. I'll send you a link 5 or 10 minutes before the meeting. And all you need to do is click on that link and it'll bring you into the Zoom meeting. If you have issues, if you haven't used Zoom before, you're wondering how to do it, talk to me before next Tuesday at 1 o'clock. So, but it's a relatively easy thing to do. We can certainly do a dry run. If you've never done Zoom before, let me know and I'll set up a time that I can connect to you, with you in Zoom, so that you know what the process is, so you're not waiting till the last minute to figure out how it works. I'm sorry, that's next Monday, not next Tuesday. So I said Tuesday, it's actually next Monday, and that is the 4th. So next Monday, the 4th, will be our Zoom meeting at 1 p.m. Yeah, so if I've lost track of the days. Probably some of you have too. So, but it'll be next Monday at 1 o'clock. Also, in addition to your presentation for your research project, will be a presentation for your business plan. The business plan presentation should be at least 5 minutes long. The research, the presenting of your research to support your paper will be 10 minutes long. So, and I want to talk a little bit about that. For grading, I use a rubric, and the first thing I look at is the length of the paper. So the paper should be 1,250 words, not including your title page and the title of the piece. Of course, you don't include that. And also, you do not include the bibliography, your sources, in that word count. So the word count applies specifically to the body of the paper, 1,250 words. If you hit 1,250 words or more, then you'll get full points for that part of the rubric or the grading system that I use. So 1,250 words or more gets you the full points for that portion of the grade, and less than 1,250, then I take off accordingly. You have to have at least 3 sources. As long as you have 3 sources or more, you'll get full points for that. Grammar and spelling should be is part of it. Spelling, you should never have a misspelled word in a paper. Now that there's spell checker, you may have a wrong word, but it shouldn't be misspelled. So you shouldn't have spelling mistakes in a paper now. It's just I don't. Just mean if you do, it means you didn't run spell checker. So make sure that you're running spell checker. Grammar is a little more tricky. If you're having issues with grammar, definitely go talk to the folks over in the CAC. So have somebody else read it for you. It's always a good idea to have someone else read your work. Get your rough draft in so I can read through it and tell you if there's anything that's going to trip you up or get you in trouble. I will check your citations for plagiarism. I've already told you this, but I'll take portions of your paper, run it through, I'll Google it, see what the hits are. And also we have within Canvas now, I have a, I have a way of taking your paper and having it checked for plagiarism. Plagiarism comes in one of two flavors. It's either going to be, hold on here. Okay. It's either going to be in the form of copying something and pasting it into your paper without citing it or putting quotes around it. Or it might be an idea that you picked up from some other place, placed in your paper, and again, you haven't cited that idea. So those are the two forms of plagiarism that we're normally going to find. Just make sure you cite everything that needs to be cited and don't claim anything as your own work that you didn't come up with. All right. Talked about Zoom. Today we're going to talk about group issues, a little bit about touring. Your next business plan assignment, assignment 6. It was great when I first set the class up in my brain 3 months ago. When I was setting things up, I was excited about your assignment for this week. But I think realistically, I'm not going to hold you to it. I was going to grade you on it, but since you can't get out and about, unless things change dramatically in the next few days, your assignment is to raise $100 of startup capital. So your job is to go out in the next week, find somebody or a multitude of people who'll give you $100 startup capital, not theoretically, actually got to get the cash or a check from them to start up your business plan. So at the beginning, for most of us, we're not going to have the cash or enough cash on hand to really get things moving. So I want you to get used to asking people for help, asking people for money. So the assignment for this week is to raise $100 in startup capital. Do the best you can with it and under the circumstances we find ourselves currently, but that was the original assignment. I'm not changing it, but obviously I will not hold you to if you can't find $100 working out of the back bedroom of your house, then I'm not going to hold that against you. So grade wise. All right, continuing here. We've talked about grading. So the paper, I'm interested in length, grammar, spelling, sources, citations, timely submission of the paper and its respective parts. So I'm logging. Did you get the topic in on time? Did you get it in? And did you get it in on time? Did you get the bibliography in? Did you get it in on time? Did you get the rough draft in on time? Anything that's missing there will count against your grade for the paper. And so make sure that those things are handed in. Presentation, I'm looking at length. The presentation is a 10-minute presentation. It should come in somewhere between 9 and 11 minutes. As long as you come in 9 to 11 minutes or 9.5 to 11 minutes, you'll be fine. I'll let you wiggle a little longer presentation without docking you points. If it goes substantially longer, if your 10-minute presentation takes 25 minutes, I'll dock you points for being too long. If, on the other hand, if your 10-minute presentation is 6 or 7 minutes, I'll definitely dock you points for being too short. So you want to bring it in as close as possible to 10 minutes. I'll also look at your use of technology, supporting documents. Maybe you'll create a chart or something and you send that to us before your presentation. I'll look at content and how effective you are in presenting that. That is all, obviously, that is our class next week on Monday at 1 o'clock. That's when it's due. So your presentation and your and your business plan presentation to the class. Those two presentations are due before class. Have them ready before class at 1 o'clock, because at 1 o'clock we'll get started. There are no late presentations. So if for some reason you can't be here at 1 o'clock next week, let me know, and then make sure you get me your presentations before the class period. So if you're not able to get it to me, if you can't deliver it in person at 1 o'clock Monday, then send it to me, videotape them, both presentations, and send them to me before class begins at 1 o'clock on Monday. And I'll try to figure out how to get those to play. Send them to me so I can mess with them. Don't send them to me at 12:55 just before class starts. Send them to me at least a couple hours before class starts so I have a chance to try to figure out how to broadcast those along with Zoom. So I'll need a running start at it. So again, if you can't make it, let me know, and just make sure that I have your both presentations before class. Executive summaries, I've got almost all of them, really excellent, and the executive summaries are going to be, I would expect you to use your executive summaries when you're doing your actual business plan presentation. Okay, what I expect from your business, again, you're doing two presentations, a presentation of your research paper and a presentation of your business plan. The presentation of your business plan is for you to do the presentation to your classmates and to me, with the goal of convincing us that we should give you money and help in your endeavor to launch your music ministry, or your touring your band, or selling shells, starting your shell business, or starting your church technology business. So your goal is to convince us that this is something that we think is viable and we want to get behind it and help support it. So if you have any questions about that, let me know, but I think that's pretty clear. So again, make sure that anything that you need to hand in that you haven't handed in, get it in. All right, I want to start the lecture with a couple things before we get into group issues, because we'll start with these things and actually get into group issues, and they all kind of tie together eventually. I want to talk about what you are worth, undervaluing your work, the danger of undervaluing your work. There is a tendency, especially when you first start out in life, when you first start out in a work environment. So you've gone to school, you have your degree, and now you're going out into the I don't know why we call it the real world, but I'll call it the real world. You're going out into society, and you're going to try to make a living as a human being in a society that that can sometimes be very generous and sometimes be very harsh on a person. Do not undervalue your value to what you're bringing to the table. So if you are going to be a computer consultant, make sure that you are valuing your work as a computer consultant that is commensurate to the kinds of work that you're doing. So there is a tendency to think that somehow, if I'm first starting out in business, I have to give my work away cheaply so that I can gain clients. Now, the problem with that thinking means that what you're doing, you don't really want to be the low-cost provider in any industry. There is a big reason for that. There are two big reasons. One, you can't make a living doing that because and one of the points here I have later I wanted to talk about is life is much more expensive than you think it is. So the first thing is you don't want to, you have to make a livable wage. And so you don't want to charge so little that you're literally giving the farm away. The second thing is that what you charge will go a long way in um, perception of what your work is worth. So if you are a computer consultant and you charge $20 an hour for your computer services, and everybody else is charging $50 an hour, the perception isn't that you're the cheapest guy. The perception is that you're not as good as the $50 an hour guy. And if you know you are as good as a $50 an hour guy, why would you charge $20? So it's important that you charge what you're worth, or what the marketplace demands, because it will dramatically affect how people deal with you as say you're service oriented, how people will deal with you and how they perceive you in terms of what you're bringing to the table in terms of value. If you undercharge for your services, it becomes very difficult then to charge more later on when all those first clients that hired you at 20 bucks an hour is telling their friends that you're only 20 bucks an hour, now you're trying to charge 50. Now, you may not charge as much as the high dollar guy in the industry, but you should be middle of the pack when you hit the ground running with your business. If carved shells routinely go for $500, you can charge $500. If nobody else is doing carved shells and you're trying to create a market or create a niche with those shells, undercharging for the shells works against you in terms of creating that niche. So make sure, and same thing with music. If when you first start out with music, I'm sure you're willing to go do a gig and probably not get paid for it, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But that's so that you can get some exposure. But as you continue to do your gigs, as you continue to do your music, you need to be thinking in terms of, if somebody calls you up and says, I want you to come and do this concert, then you need to be ready to say, okay, fine, this is what, if they're promoting it and they're getting the revenue from the concert, then you need to get paid for it, and you need to charge what you are worth. There was we had a situation a few years ago in the music department where someone called us up and said, I'm having a Christmas party. Do you have a group that would come out and sing some Christmas songs? And I said, well, sure, I'm sure I could get a group of 4 singers to come out and do Christmas carols. And the person said, okay. I said, what are you looking for? Well, I want them to come to the Christmas party, and I want them to sing for 3 hours and sing some Christmas carols. I said, okay, fine. I said, what budget are you looking at? I said, well, I can pay $100. And I said, well, it's not going to happen for $100. I said, I can't get 4 students to come together to work for $25 a piece for 3 hours worth of work. And I said, typically for a trained musician, you need to be looking at 50 bucks an hour. And so when I said 50 times 3 is 150 per person is $600, they said, well, I can't do it for that. And I said, well, that's what it's, I wouldn't even ask a student to do it for less than that. I get conversations all the time from people that want to hire students either as conversation will often go like this. I have a situation where I need a musician. Is there anybody who would come out and do this for free? Now, if it's ministry, I'm different about that. But if somebody's looking for somebody to come out and do something just to play a gig or whatever, I always value a student musician somewhere between $30 and $50 an hour. So that's what I value you at. It's important that you understand what you're worth in the marketplace. Now, ministry, I understand, is different, but still, when somebody calls up and says, "Hi, we're a church plant and we're 2 hours from here, 2 hours from Calvary, and we need somebody to come out and do our music for us." I always say, what are you paying? Now, if it's a church plant, they say, what's a church plant? And I say, well, I'll see if there's anybody that's interested in doing a church plant. But I said I'll say the problem is it's 2 hours away, and that's going to be difficult for somebody to justify that gas money. But more often than not, I get a call from a church, and the church might have 150 people in it, and they'll say, matter of fact, just got one recently from a church that's about an hour and a half from here, and they said we'll pay, and I said, okay, great. What do you pay? And I said, and what are you expecting? And they said, well, we'd want 10 hours of work a week, and what we would pay is $100 plus maybe some gas money, or it's a meal. We'll give them Sunday meal and get some gas money. And I tell them, okay, fine. Our students are in demand. Our worship art students are in demand. You are not competitive. I'm glad to post your position, but you are not competitive. The marketplace is paying more for our students than $10 an hour. And then I say, if you want to be competitive, you're going to have to pay between at least $15 and $20 an hour. And if it's a drive, you're going to have to pay mileage. And sometimes people are shocked by that, but I just tell them, look, your job is going up on a bulletin board with all the other jobs of people, with all the other churches looking for people. And normally, if you're a worship arts student at Calvary, normally, if you want a job in a church, a paid position in the church, you have that job before you graduate. So we normally place our students before they even graduate because there's such a demand for worship pastors. So I'm just saying that's kind of the animal there. So long conversation, maybe longer than it needed to be, but value your work fairly. Overvaluing, of course, is just as dangerous as undervaluing, but it has a different set of issues with it. So, but in this case, I think the issue is that you're going to think you're not worth near what you actually are worth. And as I said before, life is more expensive than you think it is. When you're figuring out, okay, I'm going to go, I'm going to do 3 churches a month. I'm going to raise $500 from each church. That's $1,500. I can live comfortably off of $1,500 a month. Maybe, maybe not. What it costs to live right now, if you live with your parents, you have no idea what it costs to live. If you live in an apartment at Calvary, if you live in a dorm room, you don't know what it costs to live. If you live over in Philly Hall, you definitely don't know what it costs to live because Philly is what, $200 or $300 a month, which is ridiculously cheap. Until you are out on your own and you're living in your own place and you have your own rent and you've signed a lease and you have a car and you have insurance and you have all the other things that you get your bill from the county for your personal property taxes, which which you probably, if you are living at home, you probably haven't even received yet. So, and then of course, if you're on your own, you understand the dramatic difference between car insurance on your parents' policy and car insurance with you as the only person on the car insurance. Dramatic difference in cost. So so all of that comes up. So all I'm saying is this: it's expensive to live. You need to make a living doing what you want to do. If it's music, then charge. And with the exception of course, you can't do that in church. But if you start to tour and churches start to have you come on tour, if you become popular and you're touring, it's okay to ask a church for a certain amount of money. King's Brass, which is a group that tours extensively, has been around for ages. It's Tim Zimmerman. They've been around for ages. Maybe you've heard of them, maybe you haven't. But the churches that know them love them, and they keep asking them to come back. It's a group of 10 musicians, keyboard player and a bunch of brass players, and they do these great arrangements of Christmas songs if it's at Christmas time, or they do hymns. They do different things. It's very entertaining. But they have a minimum. They won't come to the church for less than, it's normally, I think now it's $800 or $1,000 minimum, plus housing, plus meals, plus travel. So the if you are touring, um, well, there's other the Gettys. You can't touch the Gettys unless you're a huge church, because their costs to come to the church are high. They're very high. So you can get the Gettys. You can get some of these other folks. I'm sure we can get the Grey Havens to come to our church and play a concert, but they have minimums that they'll come and do that for. So there's a point in the touring process where you're no longer where you have to be selective, and at that point you're telling the church what it costs to bring you in. That's why when Steve Green comes to town, it's from my generation. When Steve Green comes to town, he plays at a church that seats 5,000. When some of these other big bands come in, they go to churches that seat 5,000 plus, because they're selling tickets and they're running it as a venue. So again, just be aware of these things when you're setting costs. Next, we're going to talk about groups, and I'm going to start with 2 Corinthians 6, and I know you know these verses, and you're probably thinking of them in a different light than what I'm going to share them, but I'll share them in this context because it's important. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 6, and I'm going to start verse like 2.5. Behold, now is the acceptable time. Behold, now is the day of salvation, giving no cause for offense in anything, so that the ministry will not be discredited, but in everything commending ourselves as servants of God. And this is Paul talking about all of the stuff that he's had to endure. He's been ministering for God, and he has lots and lots of war stories, some very unpleasant things that have happened to him, and of course, more unpleasant things will happen to him. But in giving no cause for offense in anything, so that the ministry will not be discredited. So he's choosing not to do anything that draws that ruins the reputation of the gospel. Anything that he does that calls into question his reputation then transfers to the gospel. So he's careful not to do that. But in everything, commending ourselves as servants of God in much endurance, in afflictions, in hardships, in distresses, in beatings, imprisonments, sleeplessness, hunger. And then he says, in purity, knowledge, patience, and kindness, in the Holy Spirit, and genuine love. So he says, in the word of truth and the power of God, by the weapons of righteousness for the right hand and the left, by glory and dishonor, by evil report and good report, regarded as deceivers and yet true, unknown yet well known, dying yet behold we live, punished yet not put to death, sorrowful yet always rejoicing. So he's setting up these different the challenges of ministry. So he says with all of this, as poor yet making many rich, as having nothing yet possessing all things. Our mouth has spoken freely to you, O Corinthians. Our heart is open wide. You are not restrained by us, but you're restrained by your own affections. Now, in like exchange, I speak as to children, open wide to us also. So he's saying through all of this stuff, and it's been a great challenge, he wants to impart a truth. So Paul is setting up something. He's about to give a truth, and the truth is a major truth. He says, with all this stuff that's happened, I want you to understand something. And he said, here's the truth. And then he says, this is what I want you to understand. Do not be bound together with unbelievers. For what partnership hath righteousness and lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? Or what harmony has Christ with Belial? Or what has a believer in common with an unbeliever? Or what agreement has the temple of God with idols? For we are the temple of the living God, just as God said, I will dwell in them and walk among them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Therefore, come out from their midst and be separate, says the Lord, and do not touch what is unclean. And I will welcome you, and I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters to me, says the Lord Almighty. 2 Corinthians 6. So, do not be unequally yoked. This is, when we talk about partnerships, and we talk about groups, this verse applies. I've had two major situations in my life, other than my marriage, and I married a Christian. And you'll hear this. These verses, specifically the verses on unequally yoked. You will hear that normally in the context of don't marry a non-Christian, and definitely don't marry a non-Christian. Now, at this point in your training, your schooling, that should take no explanation. If you marry a non-Christian, you are asking for trouble and heartache, hardship. If you've already married a non-Christian, there are verses that address that. But the best way to address it is to don't marry a non-Christian to begin with. So I have 6 kids. One of my kids married a non-Christian. They married that non-Christian with a strong uh, uh, not just from my daughters, not just from me and my wife, but my daughter received counsel from numerous people saying, "Don't marry a non-Christian." And the marriage lasted 1 year and 4 months, and it was not a good marriage. And it wasn't that the guy was horrible; it's that my daughter was on a completely different wavelength than what this guy was. Now, if you marry somebody that is a Christian, you still have all the issues that come with putting two people together that come from marriage. So it's hard enough to do that. Why would you want to complicate it by marrying a non-Christian? The same thing applies to any kind of business dealings, um, home ownership. Uh, you just wherever you might be, where an occurrence happens where you're placed into a position of um, some type of partnership with somebody, and I'm not talking marriage, I'm just talking a partnership. Do not be equally yoked. Now, there's lots of options. If I go to work for FedEx delivering packages, and FedEx is not a Christian, well, we're not equally yoked. I'm working as an employee. So then I can appeal to their obligations to me as an employee. But what we're not doing is we're not trying to, I don't have to be in a position where I'm trying to work with them to come to a compromise on making decisions for the company. So, two examples of that in my life. When I was a young man, a much younger man, right after I married my wife, I entered into a partnership with my brother-in-law, a wonderful person, wonderful human being, great guy. And we started a contracting business. So I had just started at Merrill Lynch. He was getting off the ground in a building business, and he said, "Hey, would you be my partner?" And I was about a 6-month-old baby Christian. I said, "Sure, you're a great guy. I like you. Let's do a partnership." And so he was going to do all the business side, and I was going to do he was going to do all the building side, the physical building side. I was going to do the business side because that was my area of expertise that I would bring to the partnership. And we were in the partnership for a couple of years, and it was always a challenge. And the thing that finally stopped it was one day I was keeping the books. I guess we did it for about a year and a half. One day I was going through doing the books, and I said, "Pat, there's a $40 charge here for beer." I said, "What's that? You can't charge beer against the business." And he said, "Well, yeah, it was a business expense." I said, "How so?" And he goes, "Well, we finished. It was Friday. We finished our job, and I bought a bunch of beer and took the guys out. And we all did a bunch of drinking." And I said, well, there's a couple problems with that, Pat. I said, we can't do that. And I said, number one, we can't do it on a business basis, because if those guys get drunk and they're driving home and they hit somebody with their car and they kill them, they can come back and sue you and me because we're the ones that provided the beer. So I said, you can't buy beer for the people that work for you like that in that context, and especially that much beer where they're getting drunk. You can buy somebody a beer if you take them out to dinner, but you can't buy somebody a beer. You can't buy a big, you know, couple cases of beer and go out and get drunk on a Friday afternoon, which is what they did. And I said the second problem is I'm a Christian, and I don't, and I believe alcohol is bad, and we don't want to be buying that and giving a wrong message. And I said, I don't feel comfortable paying for alcohol. Now, I don't think alcohol is immoral. I think as a Christian, I think you can drink alcohol. If not, all European Christians are not going to go to heaven, because everybody drinks in Europe. So almost everybody drinks in Europe. They don't have the same attitude towards alcohol that we do in the United States. But the point is that the last thing I want to do is as a Christian, for Christian testimony, is buy a bunch of beer for a bunch of guys that are pounding nails all day. So I said, I don't want to do that. And Pat said, well, we have to. And that was a year and a half into the business. That was the point where I said, Pat, we just cannot be in a business together anymore, which was very sad. We split it up. That was 40 years ago. And there's still, I think, somewhat hurt feelings from that experience. Not on my part, but so I'm just telling you, that's where I learned. That's where I came in contact, and I didn't even know that verse until after I was in the partnership. Now, on the other hand, when I was at Merrill Lynch, I went into a partnership with John, my partner at Merrill Lynch. John is a Christian, and John is a Christian. We went to the same church. Now, there were plenty of challenges in a partnership with another Christian, but I always had, no matter what disagreements we had two things. We had Christ in common, and so we could always go back and look at the Bible and try to Bible study our way through conflicts, because we could approach each other as brothers in Christ. And the second thing we had a contract. And so the contract said, this is how this business works. And when there's a conflict, we deal with it this way. And if we can't come to a conclusion that way, we deal with it this way. And so there was always an understanding that I could trust John, not because John was trustworthy, and he's a trustworthy guy, but because John is a Christian, and I can appeal to John as a brother in Christ, and know that there's a point of reference that he has that's eternal, that I have, and so we have this point of common. There's a point of commonality that far transcends the business we were doing together at the time. And when we finally split up the business and I sold him my share of the business, that all entered into it, and it was very simple to negotiate my sale of my half of the business to him, and it was simple. So stay with Christians. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to hire Christians for your band. You can hire non-Christians. You can hire a non-Christian drummer for your band. You can hire a non-Christian a guitarist for your band, or singer. Just don't be equally yoked. I would never, if I were a Christian and my lead singer Susie Q was a Christian, and my lead guitarist and the drummer were not Christians, I would not go into an even Steven partnership with those folks where we're all voting to make decisions, and two of the people are not Christians and two of the people are Christians. I would never do that. I can tell you, like I say, from firsthand experience, it does not work out. So, um, groups. I want you to think of groups as we talk about groups, and this is pages, we're talking 343 to about 400 today. Chapter 21 talks about groups, and it talks about contracts between record companies and groups, and then it talks about contracts within groups. And so we want to talk about those two areas. I want to start with contracts with record companies. There are several of you that want to work as part of a team. So you might, and again, even within this class, let's say, and I'll pick on um, Martine and Grace because you're both songwriters and you're both interested in touring. You have kind of similar plans. When whether you're Christian or not, the moment you bring two people into the decision-making process, you complicate things. If you live by yourself, you never get married. Life will be simpler, and decision making will be far simpler than if you get married. I don't think I'm telling you anything that you don't already know, but understand that every person you add to a group in terms of decision making complicates decision making. Doesn't make it hard or impossible necessarily. My wife and I, 95% of the time, when we make decisions, there's no friction at all. We are on the same wavelength. We serve the same God, and so in our marriage, there's not a lot of points of contention, but sometimes there are, and they are there because there's two people involved in the decision instead of one person. So the first thing I would tell you is that if you want to go out and tour churches and you want to write songs, you want to do all these things, that's fine. If you choose to do it by yourself, you don't have to worry about any of the stuff I'm going to talk about, but you should be aware of it. Typically, though, that's not the way music works. Music is highly collaborative, and you're probably going to be working with someone else. So let's say that Grace and Martine decide to tour together, and you're gonna build a group, and Martine's gonna play guitar and sing, and Grace is gonna sing, and you're both gonna write songs and all that stuff, and so you're gonna call yourself let's see, what would you call it? Murphy and Martine, Martine and Murphy, Grace and Martine, Martine Murphy actually. Maharis, Martine and Murphy and Maharis. Okay, anyway, so you decide to use your names in your group. Okay, now that I've thoroughly embarrassed you, make sure you have a contract. The contract you have with the recording company is going to is going to be written from the recording company's benefit. So make sure that you get yourself an attorney to negotiate your side of the contract. Otherwise, definitely it will be written to take care of the recording company and not to take care of you. Okay, so now we've got Martine and we have Grace, and you guys decide to hire Catherine as a guitarist, and you're going to hire, let's see, who do we have? Nathan as the sound guy. So that's all four of you. So we have Nathan on sound, Catherine on guitar, or let's say we'll put Catherine on bass because Martine is playing guitar. Grace is singing and playing keyboard. So we have Grace keyboard. Now, there are, in that relationship, there are four people. The record company wants to sign all four of you And if somebody decides to drop out of the group, the record company is going to want to sue you for breach of contract. So all four of you then become responsible for the band. And if one of you leaves the band, you can be sued for breach of contract. That's a whole nother conversation. You don't want to go there. You don't want to have breach of contract. Now, the way you get around that is that you define certain people as key members, just regular members and key members. So you might have a band where the uh, the the majority of the decision making, the majority of the revenue, the songwriting goes to two people. Let's say in this case it's Martine and Grace. And so you might say Martine and Grace are both key members of the group, and Nathan and Catherine, though you are important members of the group, you're not the key members of the group. Okay, so if you have a group named Grace and Martine, and Grace drops out, then Grace and Martine becomes a problem because the group is identified as being Grace and Martine. If you have that same group and Nathan drops out as a sound tech, you don't have nearly the problems because people aren't identifying Nathan as a key member or core member of the group. So in this case, you can have the company write your contract so that the key members are the ones that if one of the two of those key members drop out, then you have breach of contract, you have an issue. But if anybody else drops out, that's not considered grounds for canceling the contract or suing for deficits or whatever. So how you define the members of the group is important. Now, the problem with that is that if you have a group and you've identified, and you have to do it by contract, you've identified that two of the people in the group are key and two of the people in the group aren't, then you have a whole different set of dynamics within people in the group, with some people feeling that they're second-class citizens in the group versus first-class citizens. But as long as everybody's upfront about it and contractually these things are spelled out, I think those are things that are worth working through. And we'll talk about some of these. I'll give you some examples as we get to the end of this part. The agreements that you have with this determine what happens if somebody leaves the group. So if you have a group and a key member leaves the group, normally the key member that's leaving has, within the contract, it'll say that that member must re-sign with the same record company. So it says you can leave the group, but if you leave the group, you have to re-sign with the same record company, so that the original record company doesn't lose the revenue from that key person. If you are a non-key member, normally you can sign with anybody if you leave, but generally it's not as big a deal. So, but there are also, if you are a non-key member leaves your group, the record company will normally allow you to replace that non-key member and not change anything in the contract. If a key member leaves the group, usually always, the record company has the right to fire you as a group and charge you for the advance that they gave you. So you need to be aware of these things because it can cost a lot of money. So as the book talks about all sorts, it says, well, this could happen and this could happen and this could happen. All sorts of things could happen that aren't even listed in the book. I'm just telling you, you need to be aware of these things and understand what a key member is of the group and what a non-key member is. And it also is important because you will get an advance up front. Plus, they may give you, if you get a $200,000 advance from a record company plus $200,000 towards studio time, and you have $400,000 in a record or recording, and somebody leaves, somebody's on the hook for that $400,000. So, because the record company is going to want to recoup their money. So, how you structure the ownership of the group and the group relationship with the record company determines how they claim their money, whether they can claim money from that person who quit and went solo. They could probably reclaim their money for that person. Whether all the remaining three members of the band are responsible for all of it, or they're responsible for the money on a pro rata basis, that is, they're only responsible for their share. All of that stuff comes into play here with these contracts. It can get very, very complicated. And again, I'm not. This isn't a law. It is a law class, but it's not a law that kind of law class. So I'm not preparing you to take the bar exam in Missouri. I want you to understand that these things are these little landmines are all the way through these contracts. Now, I want to give you some examples towards it. There's lots of other information. Read the book if you haven't already. Coldplay. Coldplay is a band. Actually, I like Coldplay. I think they're a great band. Coldplay came out in the 90s, maybe. I think they were late 90s. Or early 2000s. But Coldplay is jointly owned. The band is worth about half a billion dollars, worth about $500 million. So Coldplay is a jointly owned band. That is, when they started, they said we all have equal say, we all share equally in the revenue. I would imagine Chris Martin gets his revenue from his compositions, which is separate. But as far as the band goes, all the gigs, all the touring, all the album sales, that's all split even. Each band member gets 25%. So that's Coldplay. On an opposing basis, Vertical Horizon, I bring that up because several of you know Donovan White. Donovan White that taught at Calvary for a number of years, actually taught probably some of you. Donovan White is part of a band called Vertical Horizon. Vertical Horizon came out in the 1990, and started by Matt Scannell, and Matt Scannell owns the band. Donovan joined the band in 2012. Donovan is a hired gun. So Donovan White joined Vertical Horizon in 2012 as a hired guitarist. He doesn't own the band. He's paid a paycheck. So you can have a group where you're hiring people to do certain jobs. They don't have to share in the ownership. So Matt Scannell, I think it's hard to pronounce it. Matt Scannell owns the band. He gets all the residuals. He gets the money from the touring. He gets all of that stuff. And then he pays the other guys that are in the band as hired people, like an orchestra would pay a hired orchestra person. So now Donovan is still part of the group. He has his own personality and you know Donovan. He's very winsome and out there. So he brings his own personality to the group. People know who he is. He has a fan base, but he's hired to be part of that group. Now, what that means is that Donovan, Matt might check with Donovan if they're going to make a decision, but Matt makes all the decisions. So he may get input from Donovan, but Donovan doesn't actually make decisions. Matt can fire and hire Donovan or other people, and he doesn't have to check with anybody. So that is a more typical type of band. It would be the same thing with a whole lot of folks, I guess. The Beatles started out splitting everything equally, and the only thing they didn't split out was the songwriting. So you had John Lennon and Paul McCartney were both writing the vast majority of the songs for the Beatles, and they were split. The songwriting was split between Paul McCartney, John Lennon, and three other entities. So Paul McCartney got 20%, John Lennon got 20%, and all the other guys each got 20%. The other guys involved in the songwriting group. So and it wasn't until later that George Harrison and Ringo Starr each got a small portion, 1.6% of the songwriting revenue, because they would contribute little bits and pieces to each song just in the process of writing songs. So they would flesh out, the two main songwriters would flesh out the songs, bring them in, they'd woodshed them and work through them and offer some input. And so eventually they got 1.6%. Look, 1.6% of a Beatles song would be a whole lot of money. So that's how the Beatles work. So every one of these groups has a different kind of it's a different animal, and it all has to be worked out within that contract with working with the record company. Okay, internal contracts with band members. The most important asset of a band, a successful band, the most important asset, and even moderately successful or middling or almost successful band, the most important asset of any band is the band name. The name is it. The use of the name, that's why you have to have internally between the band members, you have to have the use of the name spelled out. That is, if, like for instance, the Beach Boys. Mike Love, the Beach Boys toured for a while. Brian Wilson, his brain got wacky, and he went a bit nuts for a while, and then he came back into the group, and one of the Beach Boys died. Mike Love formed another group that toured singing the Beach Boys songs, and he wasn't allowed to take Beach Boys with him. So you have all of these guys with Beach Boys attached to the Beach Boys, and they didn't have the right to take the name with them as a Beach Boy. So the Beach Boys, the actual name has to be used with the group as it is built into their contract. So you need to figure out who controls the name, who can use the name. We're back to our group. Let's say that the four of you decide to start a group, and you call yourselves the Floridores. Okay, so you're the Floridores. And Martine says, I've had enough of the Floridores. I'm the main songwriter and the lead guitarist of the Floridores. I'm going to go extract myself from these three people, and I'm going to hire three different people, and I'm going to call us the Floridores. Well, unless contractually it says that Martine can leave and take the name with them, Martine can't do that. Generally, if you start out as a partnership, you're going to have joint ownership of the name. And so it's not just joint ownership of the name, but it's joint ownership of everything, decision making, everything else. If Martine decides to start a band called the Floridores, and Martine is the owner of the band, and he hires people to play for him, but he maintains sole ownership of the assets of the band, then he can do whatever he wants to with the Floridores. He can hire and fire people, he can do whatever, he's got the name. But the moment he adds another person into the mix, that name then becomes controlled by two people or three people, depending on how many. Coldplay is controlled by four people. So one person can't just leave Coldplay and start another band called Coldplay. So that all needs to be specified in a contract. The next thing that needs to be specified in the contract internally within your group is who gets what percentage of the revenue. And you may decide, okay, we're just going to split everything equally. Okay, fine. Just make sure that you understand that and that you've dealt with what happens if somebody leaves the group. So if you form the Floridores, everybody in the group has equal ownership, and Nathan decides to leave and go start his own band. Nathan, you may have that a majority of the people keep the name. Okay, fine. So we know the Floridors stay with the original three members. Nathan goes out and starts his own band. Nathan should still get residuals from the songs that were recorded while he was part of the band. But what happens after that, now that he's left? Well, what happens about the songs that he was involved with up to the point that he left? I mean, all that should be spelled out in the contract. Decision making. Who controls what and how do you make decisions? Okay, that should be clear by now. Songwriting and publishing. The Beatles started out pretty clear. It was John Lennon and Paul McCartney writing the songs. Then Ringo Starr and George Harrison started to write songs. And quite a bit of George Harrison stuff was published, and some of Ringo Starr stuff. So how do you handle all of that? And you can't base it on, you need to treat people fairly up front, because you don't know what's going to happen with the band. You don't know if it's going to become famous. Things are going to get, make all these decisions before you get famous, because once you get famous and money is actually involved, it's much, much harder to negotiate these contracts. So you want to do it when everybody is calm, happy, and want to move the ball forward. So make sure that you're doing this stuff before you get well known. Outside activities. How are you going to split outside activities? The Beatles split everything evenly. So all the movies that the Beatles made, all of the appearances, all of the touring, that was all split even Steven, 25% each. The other things that you need to specify in the contract is stuff like how do you handle hirings and firings, people that quit, if you incur expenses, if you need to buy a set of amps and a soundboard, it's going to cost $15,000, and one person has the money but the other people don't. That person puts the $15,000 in. Are they going to be paid back, or are you? Do they own it and they own it in the future? All that stuff. What happens in case of death? When I was working for Merrill Lynch, I had a buyout clause in my contract. My assets, my half of the business was worth a chunk of money, and so we set it up so that we had life insurance policies, so that if one of us died, the spouse got the life insurance, so that there wasn't, so that the spouse, so that the remaining partner didn't have to buy the spouse out. So normally, between the two of us, if something had happened to one of us, the other guy would have been responsible for paying the surviving spouse for that half of the business. In this case, we used life insurance, and it worked a lot better. It's called Keyman Insurance. Anyway, it's another animal, and you should. It's not in the book, but that's something you would want to consider with a group like this. Oh, what else? Contributions, who owes what, how do you buy equipment, who pays for the equipment, what do you do if you have a group, you have a group of 4 people, you need to buy a bunch of sound equipment, and you say, okay, we're going to own this evenly, but 3 of you have jobs and the 4th guy is just out there writing songs, and so the 3 of you have money to kick in, but the 4th guy doesn't, to buy that sound equipment. You better specify how that's all going to work contractually. How do you deal with ex-partners? How do you deal with buyouts? Okay, so I mentioned before, Coldplay is worth about $500 million. Much of that is intangible value. Obviously, if one of the members of Coldplay left, it would affect the value of the band. But if the drummer left, that's the shy guy. I think he's pretty shy, and I can't remember his name. That would be completely different than if Chris Martin left. Chris Martin, the guy that writes all the songs and he fronts the band and does the singing. So if somebody wanted to buy out, if somebody wanted to leave the band and wanted to sell their share of the band to the rest of the band, normally you're going to look at hard assets, because those are the only things that can be readily valued. So hard assets would be all of the equipment, any real estate that they own, any of the cash in the bank. Um, there's probably not a whole lot of money there relative to what the band is actually worth. But it's hard to determine what the intangible value of that band is because the value of the band is dependent on people being in the band. So if somebody leaves, it can very well drastically alter the value of the intangible value of the band. And so again, you want to specify all this stuff. Normally when you split and somebody's buying out, they're having the band buy out their share. It's normally for the hard assets, the stuff that you can actually touch, see, smell, and value. And then it's not what it's valued at the new value, it's what it's valued at currently in its used condition. Now, remember that the person who's getting bought out, they don't have to buy out that person's contractual obligations. So the guy who's getting the residuals from all the songs that have been recorded, he'll continue to get those if he leaves the band. We're talking about the actual assets of the band. So that's buyouts. And then finally, this chapter 21, corporate versus partnership. So corporate structure versus partnership. The book goes into that. Interesting. It says, do you want to be a corporation or a partnership? Here are the advantages and disadvantages. In a nutshell, because we already talked about this in social marketing, corporation protects you protects your individual assets if you are sued. Okay, so if I'm part of a corporation and my tour vehicle backs up over some kid at a venue, and they come to sue me, or they sue the band. If the band is a corporation, they can't. They can only sue the corporation. They can't sue you personally, individually. If, on the other hand, you are a partnership, all of that goes out the window. So if you have a partnership and you get sued, people can sue you not just for the value of the corporate or the value of the actual band of the partnership, but also each individual within that partnership. So you want to not do partnerships. You want to do corporations or something that limits your liability. Now, what the book does mention is, briefly, it mentions LLCs. Well, I think LLC is actually the best. It comes down, again, we talked about this already, but it comes down between those two extremes, partnerships and corporations. The LLC, the limited liability company, limits your liability to the value of the company and doesn't let people then come and sue you on a personal basis. Typically, again, that's why you have to have legal representation in this stuff to make sure it's set up the way it needs to be. But it's not surprising that doctors and attorneys and people in those kinds of fields, where there's a high frequency of lawsuits, and the lawsuits are settled for outrageous amounts of money, it shouldn't surprise you that many of those doctors and attorneys and other professional types like that choose limited liability companies to limit their personal liability. So an LLC, I think, is a great way to go for a band. All right, chapter 22 talks about the name of the chapter is What's in a Name, and it talks about naming your group. So there's a whole bunch of information in there. I want to hit two big points. The first point is this: when you decide on a name for your group, aside from taking your two last names or your two first names, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, instead of doing that, you actually try to come up with a name for your group. And there's nothing wrong with taking your names. So, but you want a name that people can identify with the group, and you want there to be what's called goodwill. You want there to be warm and fuzzy feelings about that, or positive feelings, and how they say, okay, here's the name of the group. That makes me think of the group and what they do. So that's where you want to get to with the name. It's part of your marketing. Two things for names that you need to remember. First of all, make sure no one else is using it and no one else has the rights to it. So you you're thinking through a name, you're tossing ideas back and forth. Somebody comes up with an idea for a name. Okay, you say, hey, that's a great name. Let's use that name. Well, before you say yes to that, the first thing you want to do is Google the name and see if anybody else is using it. If somebody else is using it, don't use it. Okay, find another name. You can then check Whois, www.whois.com. Whois is a place where you can go to on the internet. You put, and it's a website registry. So Whois, put the name of the website or the name you're looking for. Whois, put in your name, and it'll tell you if there's a website attached to that name. You can check the name by adding it to a .com extension. So if you say, well, hey, Coldplay is a great name for bands. Put in Coldplay.com and see if anything comes up. If it does, you probably need to look someplace else. Check the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. That website is listed in the book. You can go to the website, type in the name, and see if anybody's registered that name. Then you can go to the U.S. Copyright Office, see if they've got a searchable online catalog also listed. So check there. Your record company will do a name check, not to protect you, but to protect them, because they don't want to release a record with the name on it that's already been used by somebody, because they'll get sued. They've already done that. They've been there, done that. But they're just there to protect them, not to protect you. So you need to do your own research on this. Okay. And then you might find the perfect name. You might find the perfect name, but somebody else is using it. You can always buy the rights to a name. So you could say, you've come up with the name. You say that's a great name, and you Google it, and you find somebody else that's using that name. Like Josh did, Feast KC. Feast KC was Will Vlog for Food. The current Will Vlog for Food was started out as a site called Feast KC. Unfortunately, somebody else had that name. So, and since the other folks had the name and didn't want to get rid of it, Josh had to change the name of the business. You can buy names. So it's possible Josh could have gone to Feast KC and said, hey, would you sell me the name? And if Feast KC said, yeah, we'll sell you the rights to the name for X amount of dollars. Well, if they reached an agreement, they could sign that agreement, and Feast KC could say, okay, we're no longer going to call ourselves Feast KC. We've sold that to somebody else. I'm here working on an HP laptop. HP is Hewlett Packard. Hewlett Packard is not the same Hewlett Packard. That is just a name. HP Computers bought the name Hewlett Packard from the original Hewlett Packard company, which is car manufacturers. They bought the name because of the recognition and popped it into their computers. They have no connection. HP Computer Company has no connection with Hewlett Packard cars, except for the fact that they paid for the right to use the name. And so that happens often in business. And so that's going to cost you somewhere, maybe a few thousand, maybe $30,000, $50,000. Could cost 6 or 7 figures if the name is really popular. But Coldplay, we're going back to Coldplay. The band Coldplay got the name from another band. They were trying to come up with a name for a band. They heard of this other band. It was called Coldplay. They went to them. I don't know what they paid for it, but they got the rights to the word Coldplay and put that on their band. So that's where the name for Coldplay came from. It came from another band. So so that's the first thing with names. The second thing with names that you need to do is you need to protect it once you set it. And the reason you need to protect your name is that if the name has any kind of value and you haven't protected it, somebody else will. and make your life miserable because they'll rip the name off. And then if they trademark it or if they service mark it, then you lose the rights to use the name, even if you came up with it. So once you finalize your name, you want to make it so that no one else can claim it. And the way you do that is you get a service mark. A service mark is like, for a name, is the same thing as a trademark, like Heinz ketchup or Hostess Twinkies. Hostess and Heinz, those are trademarks. Hostess Twinkies or Heinz. Yeah, Hostess Twinkie would be probably the best one there. But um, uh, you you have you want to service mark the name. To service mark the name and protect it on a federal level, you have to demonstrate on the federal level, that is outside of your own state, um, uh, that, for instance, my wife's business is registered with the state, and that name is registered as a business within the state. If she wanted to register that business federally, if the business took off and had a national presence, she would need to register that as a service mark and protect it on a federal level. Right now, it's just protected within the state. And now she probably wouldn't do that because there's other businesses with similar names outside of our state, and that could become problematic. So we'd probably have to come up with a different name for it anyway. But to get the federal protection, you have to show interstate commerce. Interstate commerce is business that happens across state lines. Remember that we're not a democracy. The United States is not a democracy. It's a republic. The United States is a collection of individual states with individual leaders called governors. And each of those states has its own set of laws. So we are not a democracy. We are simply a collection of united states. And because of that, there are laws that protect within the state that don't carry outside of the state unless you trigger federal laws. Federal law for service marks would be triggered if you had interstate commerce. So the next thing you want to do after you figure out what your name is, it can be as simple as do an email blast to people. Just make sure one of those people live outside the state. If we're here in Missouri, if they live in Kansas and you do that email blast, you've had interstate commerce. If you open up a website and you're selling merchandise, you got your merch on there, you got caps and T-shirts, and somebody in Wisconsin buys your T-shirt, okay, because they like your band. That's interstate commerce. The moment you do that, you can now register your name on a federal level, on a national level, and get national protection. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to register your name with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. That's where patents and trademarks are registered. Service marks are registered there. So you go online, again, you go to the book, go online, register your service mark for your name. The rest of Chapter 22 goes through the registration details of both foreign and domestic. And those are in there. I'll let you look at those. I don't know, at the beginning, I don't know that you'd have to worry a whole lot about registering on a foreign basis. But if you get a lot of traction very quickly, you're going to want to do that also. The other thing I would say about names, and this is critical, you want, at the same time you're doing all that other stuff, and before your name becomes super popular, you want to go back and reserve domain names. So domain name is your www. Whatever that name is, .com or whatever your extension is. So when we moved our church, and we changed the name from Blue Ridge Bible Church, which, by the way, there's another Blue Ridge Bible Church in Virginia. So we're blueridgebible.com. They're either blueridge.com or blueridgebiblechurch.com. And so very similar names. The names are the same. The two churches have the same names, and the domain names are very similar. So we went to Word of Grace, and the first thing we did, we sat down, we came up with a name, the elders voted on it, and we took Word of Grace. The very next that was in the evening. The very next day, we got on and we reserved all of the domain names that we could that had that kind of wordofgrace.com, wordofgrace.org, wordofgrace, whatever we could find, whatever wordofgrace or W of G or any variations on that. We reserve those domain names because if you don't, first of all, somebody probably has reserved some of them. But if you don't reserve it and somebody sees that you have a business called Word of Grace, they will reserve the domain name and then hold you hostage to try to buy that from them. So there's lots of companies out there that will, not lots, there's a few big companies out there that will buy domain names and then try to sell those names to people who might need it. So that's why when you go online and you have the name of a business and you're thinking, oh, I just saw this business and I wonder if this business has a website. So you plug in the name of the business.com and what comes up is this is owned by this company. If you want to buy it, check here. So that's because somebody already came up with the name and they're willing to sell it to you for money. So interesting way to design a company, but it's what's out there. Okay. So register your domain names. Lastly, we're going to talk about personal appearances. I'm not going to go much into this. Book has lots and lots of information on touring. We talked about touring in social media and marketing. It's a great read. This book tells you everything. Of course, it's written by an entertainment attorney. Has a great discussion of how tours work, who gets paid what. Yeah, you get about 90% of your revenue after expenses. The expenses are very high for tours. Who gets paid what, how they're put together, who operates what part of the tour. All that's there. It's a great read. It's very interesting. If you're cooped up in the house like all of us are, and you don't have anything else to do, which you do actually this week, you have to write your paper or finish your paper. Paper should be pretty well written now, but you're going to finish up your paper and get your presentation ready. Okay, so you got all of that going on. But when this is all done, class is done, go back and read that chapter. It's great. But here are the main takeaways, the things that I want to point out about the chapter. Number one, have somebody else handle the details of your tour, if at all possible. When you first start out, you're probably going to be doing much of the detail work, legwork, and the phone calls to set up your tour. I understand that. But as soon as possible, try to get somebody else to do it. You don't want to be consumed by the details of a tour while you are on tour trying to make music or whatever it is that you're doing. So have somebody else handle the details. That's going to be like a personal manager. That's normally, if you're a big band, that's what it is. Personal manager could be an agent, might be a buddy. In your case, might be a buddy. If you get married, it could be your spouse. If I did it, I'd have my wife take care of those details if she were willing to. Maybe an interested fan. You got somebody who's been following you and they want to be involved in your ministry, so you can turn it over to them. Really interesting kinds of things you can do with this. And we talked about this again in the previous class. So when you are on tour, you're actually touring. There's too much going on the day that you sing for you to even worry about logistics. Make sure you have a logistics person. Quite often, it's that same person who put the tour together. Logistics is handling the details as they play out for the day. When I was running evidence, I had an inside person and an outside person. So the inside person was Teresa Purinton, and she set up the tour. She made the contacts. She confirmed all the dates. She asked about special needs, and were there any needs in the body, anything we needed to know. She asked the questions about, are you okay with drums, and if we bring a set of drums. she was the one who made sure that, because we had people in the group that had food allergies, she made sure the churches knew that there were food allergies and they were going to provide a meal for us. So make sure that they provided some food for this person over here who can't eat peanuts or can't eat wheat or whatever it is. So all of that was done by Teresa. That's all that inside work. Then we had somebody that was a member of the group of evidence that would be the designated logistics person. And that logistics person, we would drive to a venue, we'd come in on the bus. Um, I stayed on the bus with the group. This person would get off, usually with an assistant, and those two people would go into the venue before any of the rest of us got off the bus. They would go into the venue, they would make contact with the person they were supposed to make contact with, make sure everything was ready, find out where we're supposed to park the bus, and find out where the room was that we're supposed to stow all of our important items, a lockable room, because we always ask for that. Where do we put purses and stuff while we're singing? And so all of that logistical stuff was with one person, the same person at each venue. So I didn't rotate logistics. I picked one responsible person, and they were the logistics person for the whole year for the group. So that if I had an issue or I had a question, I went to the logistics person and I said, okay, we need this and this, and we need an extension cord. And she'd go, okay, I know where to go back and ask the person. So I could concentrate on getting the group ready to perform. The group could concentrate on getting the group ready to perform. The logistics person could take of any issues, even though that was one of the performing members. They had that extra responsibility, and usually it was the right person. It was a logistics-minded person, so they were thrilled to do it. And then it ended up on their resumes when they went out looking for jobs. So the other thing is I'm thinking of like Gracia Burnham. Gracia Burnham, wonderful lady who has I think some of you know Gracia, um, a wonderful ministry. She has an assistant that she works with that helps her with correspondence and setting up tours and dealing with different uh, venues as she's booked into those venues. And so she has this assistant that handles details for her. So we're not talking, you don't have to have a band with platinum record sales and uh, 50 million fans. If you go out and start to tour, you can get a logistics person the first day, the beginning of your first day of your first tour. Um, it makes sense to do that. Um, so my next point is you're never too small to look for sponsorships. You're never too small to get a logistics person or to get a manager, and you're never too small to look for sponsorships. You're out there touring. Ask people to sponsor what you're doing. We talked about this again in social media, but it could be individuals, it could be businesses, churches, radio stations, music stores. Offer to go in and do a gig at a music store. In the old days, when record stores used to have places where bands would come in and play, local bands would come in and play and do gigs, draw people in the store. Coffee houses, maybe you can get a gig at several coffee houses and they support your ministry. Um, and any place else that you might perform. So um, look into sponsorships. That's why this week your assignment was to find $100. Just go out and ask. You'd be amazed at how quickly people will write you $100. I'm amazed at how quickly I write people checks for $50 and $100 because of stuff they have going on. So don't ask me. That's cheating. Just go get established and then come ask me. I'm sure I would love to support all of you guys, but this isn't about asking me for money. This is about asking other people because you have to make a more broad connection than just me and the other people in the class. So go out and uh, get used to talking to people about money. Next, don't forget that established Christian groups need opening acts too. So when you're out there and you're thinking, oh, I want to do a tour, but it's so hard, and well, I can do a tour locally. How would I break into a big tour market? Ask one of your favorite groups, smaller groups, if you could tour with them, or if they're interested in touring, or hey, I'm going to send you would you be interested? Could I send you a video of my last gig? I would love to be an opening band for your group. Okay, so let's say that you like Gray Havens. Gray Havens has been to Calvary. When Gray Havens came to Calvary, it was just Gray Havens. I think it was 2 people or possibly 3 people. I think it was just 2 people. So they rolled into town, they set up their equipment, they did their concert, and they left. Well, what if you talked to Gray Havens and said, "I know you're driving around there because Gray Havens isn't nationally known at a level of, say, a lot of other artists, but they do have a following. So let's say that you talk to Gray Havens and you say, hey, could I be your opening act? Okay, well, that gives legitimacy to Gray Havens. And if you are, if that is, if your genre of music is the same. So let's say you write music that sounds kind of like Gray Havens. So you talk to them and you say, could I open for you um, on these dates? I saw that your tour is going on. Could I open for you on these 3 dates? And so you can kind of piggyback that way. Um, you can also play for, we have these Christian festivals locally where they have these big play-ins. A bunch of Christian bands get together, play for the weekend. Make sure a lot of those bands are local. Make sure that you get into those band venues and play those concerts because it's a great place to meet other Christian bands. Maybe somebody hears you and offers you a contract, or which can happen, or another band says, "Hey, why don't you open for us in um, our next tour?" So that's a possibility. Um, then think about another option is to think about touring with another musician. So let's say that after our talk about partnerships, Martine and Grace are both songwriters and they both decide that they want to tour, but they don't want to be part of each other's endeavors. Well, maybe Martine and Grace decide, let's tour together. You do an opening set, then I'll do a set, then you do another set, and I'll do another set. And then maybe at the end we can come together and do something jointly. Okay, so you can have 2 different bands instead of an opening and then a key position. You just both tour together so that you have 2 different bands touring together. Um, it doesn't even have to be a band. It could be another act. It could be a Christian magician. It could be a speaker. One year, Evidence did a summer tour with Gracia Burnham. Gracia Burnham had her summer tour ready to go. She called us up and she said, would Evidence be willing to open for me for my summer tour? We said, oh, yeah, I would love to. So she already had the tour set up. We just piggy-tailed on that and piggy-tailed on that and piggybacked. I'm sorry, piggybacked onto that tour. And so we were the opening for her speaking tour. And so it was simple. We had the venues. All we had to do was set up places for us to stay. And of course, we're given legitimacy because Gracia Burnham is saying this is a great group. At the time, her son was actually a performer in the group. And it worked out very, very well. That was a great summer, actually. And we performed in front of crowds that were much larger than what we would have normally performed in for our summer leg of the tour. And then finally, always work out revenue splits, expectations, all of that before hitting the road with another group. So if you do decide to 2 groups, you're one of 2 groups that decide to tour together, make sure that you've worked out all the logistics between your 2 groups and you do a contract between the 2 groups that says here are our expectations for each other, this is what we'll do, and this is what we'll share, and this is what we don't share, and work all that out before you go off on tour. All right, that is all that I have for you today. We're a little short, not too short. I guess if I took a break, we'd be closer to 2 hours. But anyway, so if you have a question, a comment, you're getting ready for your paper presentation, you have anything you need to ask, let me know. Otherwise, next week we will meet. Monday at 1 o'clock. Monday, make sure I've got the right class. Monday the 4th at 1 o'clock, and that'll be a Zoom meeting. Until then, be safe, and I'll talk to you next week.